In the 1200s, the Mongol Empire exploded across Eurasia with staggering speed. From the Danube River to the Pacific coast, it carved a path through cities, mountains, and centuries of resistance. But conquering territory was only the beginning. The real challenge? Keeping it connected. Armies can seize land, but empires are held together by information and the ability to move it. So the Mongols built something remarkable, a relay system that could carry orders, intelligence, and royal decrees across thousands of kilometers faster than anyone thought possible. It was called the Yam, a web of waystations, horses, and elite couriers stretching from one end of the empire to the other. If you were standing by one of those roads, you might see a single rider appear. No soldiers, no ceremony, just a man on horseback, traveling light, with a leather pouch at his side and a thin metal tablet around his neck. That tablet was the Pesa. It wasn't decorative, it was power, a sign that the rider spoke for the Khan, and that no one was to delay him. This is the story of how a simple but brilliant system helped the Mongols govern the largest land empire in history, built on fear, expanded by fire, sustained by speed. The Yam wasn't improvised, it was planned and scaled. Genghis Khan laid the foundation, but it was his successors who turned it into the empire's central nervous system. One Yuan dynasty administrator reportedly wrote, "When a message leaves Dadu, it reaches the borders of the empire before the ink is dry in the capital." That might be exaggeration, but not by much. Relay stations, called urtu, were placed every 25 to 40 kilometers, depending on terrain. A courier would ride from one station to the next, swap horses, rest briefly, and continue. It meant a message could move day and night, covering vast distances without delay. By the 14th century, under the Yuan dynasty in China, there were over 1,400 stations and more than 50,000 horses assigned to the system. Some estimates suggest even higher numbers during its peak under Ugude and Munka Khan. Each station was stocked with food, firewood, gears or shelters, and a stable of fresh mounts. In some areas, officials maintained boats to cross rivers, camels to traverse desert, or even sleds for winter routes across frozen steppes. These were not casual posts. Local populations were required by law to support them. Taxes in kind, hay, fodder, labor, livestock, kept the network running. Communities that failed to uphold their duty risked punishment, or worse. The infrastructure was layered. There were regular couriers and express couriers, the latter traveling under urgent orders, often with armed escorts. Roads were prioritized and protected. In some cases, roads were rebuilt entirely to serve the Yam. What made the system unique wasn't just scale, it was integration. The Yam wasn't separate from governance, it was governance. Through it came census records, tax codes, trade deals, diplomatic messages, military strategies. And unlike many earlier systems, such as the Persian Angarium, the Roman Cursus Publicus, or the Abbasid Barid, the Yam wasn't limited to elite centers or small provinces. The Persian couriers had speed, the Romans had permanence, and the Abbasids had intelligence gathering, but none matched the scale, decentralization, and harsh condition resilience of the Mongol network. Without the Yam, there was no empire, only distance. First glance, an urta was nothing special. A cluster of gurs or mud brick huts, a corral of horses, a fire pit, and a supply cache. But to the empire, it was a beating heart. Each station was manned by caretakers, often local families or conscripted labor, responsible for feeding the riders, tending to horses, and maintaining readiness. Yuan dynasty records, such as those referenced in the Yuan Shi, A History of the Yuan, notes that if a courier arrived and no fresh horse was ready, the responsible party could be fined, demoted, or even punished corporally, reinforcing how critical the yam was to state function. Riders only rest for minutes, but in that time they were fed a quick hot meal, roasted mutton, broth, fermented mare's milk, and their horse was swapped for a fresh mount already saddled and ready. In winter, fires were kept constantly burning. In desert regions, shade and wells were priority. Even salt blocks for horses were stocked in advance. Inside, the walls were often hung with tack, tools, and maps marked with imperial seals. In some wealthier regions, you'd even find dried medicinal herbs, falcons for scouting, or spare armor hanging from wooden beams. Visitors to the yam system, like the Franciscan friar Giovanni da Pian del Carpin, noted the eerie efficiency. Everything had its place. Couriers moved in and out like shadows. Some stations doubled as local intelligence outposts. They gathered rumors, tracked troop movements, and served as eyes for regional governors. The yam wasn't just fast, it listened. In harsh seasons, stations adapted. Roofs were weighted with stone against wind. Snow was packed tight to insulate girs. In some cases, women maintained the station while men were called to war or transport, making the yam partially dependent on unacknowledged female labor. From these quiet outposts, a message could leap across half the world in under 2 weeks. Every courier who rode the yam wore a token of power, the paisa. These were not decorative ornaments, but official passes made of bronze, silver, or gold, inscribed with lines of imperial script. The higher the rank of the courier, the more precious the metal. A gold paisa marked a senior messenger, or a foreign envoy under protection of the Great Khan. It could command food, horses, lodging, and priority access across the empire. Refusing service to a bearer of a paisa wasn't just illegal, it was dangerous. Mongol law made it clear. Interfering with the yam was an offense punishable by death. Couriers, though not always noble, were respected, even feared. They spoke for the state, and they moved with authority. There were levels within the courier system. Some were assigned to routine posts, carrying tax rolls or census data. Others were express riders, trusted with military orders, war intelligence, or summons from the Khan himself. The best of them could ride 200 to 300 kilometers in a single day using the station network, a speed unheard of in most of the medieval world. Even ambassadors and merchants who received a paisa became part of this ecosystem. Marco Polo carried one. He later wrote, "I was supplied with everything needful in all the countries through which I passed, by command of the Great Khan." While many scholars accept Polo's account as broadly accurate, Others caution that some of his descriptions may reflect second-hand reports or editorial shaping by his transcribers. Nonetheless, the protections afforded by the Paisa are confirmed by Chinese and Persian sources, supporting the broad picture he painted. Some scholars believe that Marco Polo's ability to travel safely and swiftly through unfamiliar regions was almost entirely thanks to the legal and cultural protections the Paisa granted. In many ways, it prefigured the modern system of diplomatic immunity, giving carriers priority passage and shielding them from local interference. The concept was later echoed by the Ottoman firman, Russian courier privileges under the Tsars, and today's diplomatic passport system. But it was the Mongols who embedded the idea in a vast, functioning bureaucracy that linked distant societies. The Paisa turned the chaotic vastness of the empire into something navigable and safe, at least for those under its banner. For every courier galloping across green plains, another faced the brutal edge of empire. The Yam was vast, and so were its dangers. Riders crossed frozen lakes in Siberia, sand-blasted deserts in Central Asia, and mountain passes in the Caucasus where one wrong step meant death. Horses slipped, packs froze, bandits waited in ambush. Yet the system held. There are accounts of couriers riding through snowstorms so fierce they wrapped themselves in sheepskins and rode blind. In the Gobi, water was so scarce riders were trained to ration sweat. In Persia, some relays operated under threat from rebellious factions, but the Yam kept moving. One story tells of a Mongol courier who completed a 1,000-kilometer run with a broken arm, refusing to stop until his message was delivered. Others were recorded surviving arrow wounds, only to be reassigned within days. These weren't myths. The Mongol record keepers, and later observers like Rashid al-Din and Marco Polo, documented feats that read like legend, but were routine for the Yam's best. During Guyuk Khan's short reign, a dispute among rival generals in the west forced him to send riders to summon them to the capital with urgency. Rashid al-Din, the Persian historian, notes that messengers were dispatched across thousands of kilometers, some reportedly arriving within 10 to 12 days, a logistical feat that likely depended on Yam relay efficiency. The generals arrived, and imperial unity was momentarily restored. These riders weren't just fearless, they were trained from youth in endurance, balance, survival, and horse lore. In Mongol culture, a child learned to ride before they could read. The best couriers were hardened by life on the steppe and bound by honor to deliver. Riders carried more than orders, they carried reputation. Failure meant disgrace. Slowing down could mean suspicion. So they galloped, endured, and vanished into the next horizon. Later empires attempted to mimic such systems. The American Pony Express, for instance, covered similar distances across hostile terrain, but lasted barely 2 years. The Yam endured for a century. The Yam was never just a system. It was a crucible, one that burned weakness away and left only momentum. In contrast, earlier networks like Rome's Cursus Publicus faded as central authority declined, and others like the Persian or Byzantine couriers remained regionally bound. The Yam's scale and resiliency remain unmatched until the advent of modern telegraph and rail infrastructure. No empire lasts forever, and even the Yam, built for endurance, could not outrun the empire's collapse. As the Mongol Khanates fractured into the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, the Chagatai Khanate, and the Yuan in China, the coordination that once held the Yam together began to break. Borders became contested, regional rulers stopped sharing resources, the roads grew less safe. By the 1350s, the Black Death cut across the trade routes the Yam relied on. Stations went quiet, horses died or were seized by armies. Communities that once supported the system now resisted or disappeared entirely. In China, the fall of the Yuan dynasty brought a Confucian revival and a backlash against many Mongol innovations. The Ming administration replaced parts of the system, but the spirit of the Yam, the sheer scale and speed, was never replicated. Still, its influence lingered. The very idea of long-distance governance through structured communication would shape later empires. Russian czars borrowed elements of the Pisa system, including the issuance of travel charters and tax-exempt courier privileges for official messengers. Under Ivan the Terrible and later Peter the Great, elements of relay logistics and sealed credentials echoed Mongol precedent, particularly along Siberian routes. The Ottoman relay posts carried echoes of the Ortu. Even the British Empire's mail and telegraph networks share faint DNA with the Yam's relentless pace. Qing dynasty administrators re-established northern courier lines for imperial edicts, sometimes even borrowing Mongol station routes. In 18th century Russia, a Siberian post system connected outposts using techniques reminiscent of the Yam. Seasonal relays, food stockpiles, and even courier immunity. During World War II, mobile communication stations used in the Red Army mimicked relay patterns, albeit mechanized. Even modern global corporations, from express mail carriers to sprawling e-commerce logistics, unknowingly carry the legacy of the Yam. Scanning hubs, relay nodes, guaranteed priority handling for elite-tier customers. The echoes are there. In a sense, the Yam was a medieval analog to the internet, a physical infrastructure enabling rapid transmission of information across vast and culturally diverse terrain. The intelligence, control, and responsiveness it offered made the Mongol administration more agile than many modern states. It inspired systems as diverse as Tsarist Russia's Siberian Post, Qing China's courier lines, and even the logistical doctrine of 20th century militaries. In Silicon Valley and Shenzhen alike, companies continue refining hub-and-spoke networks, not unlike those that once carried silk and seal across the steppe. The Yam was more than logistics, it was vision. It made the impossible feel practical and made the Mongol Empire more than just conquest. It made it a machine, one built on the backs of horses and the will to reach the horizon. That was the story of the Mongol Yam. Not just a network, but a lifeline across half the world. If you enjoyed this and want more slow, deep dives into the quiet mechanics of history, you're in the right place. I release new episodes here on 1000 Yesterdays, so if you'd like to wander through forgotten empires, follow trade winds, and meet the people history almost forgot, just hit subscribe. And maybe the bell too, if you'd like to hear the next story as it arrives. Thanks for riding along. Until the next one.